Good afternoon. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry to review the definition of the waters of the United States proposed role and the impact on rural America will come to order. Let me open with my opening statement. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. I appreciate all the members being here. I appreciate your patience given we got a little bit behind with the floor business, but we're here now and ready to get to work. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I want to welcome you to today's hearing to review the definition of the waters of the United States proposed role and its impact on rural America. The Clean Water Act created a historic partnership between the federal government and the states to protect our nation's navigable waterways. However, since the law's inception, the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers have on many occasions ignored the original intent of Congress and have instead promoted the concept of statutory ambiguity as a justification for slowly and continually extending their jurisdictional reach. As a result, the Supreme Court has ruled that the EPA has unlawfully expanded its authority, compelling the high courts to recommend that the government's authority must be more clearly defined. The Obama administration has taken it upon itself to redefine their authority over jurisdictional waters, also known as navigable waters. When Congress rejected legislation that would expand the federal scope and jurisdiction over regulated waterways, the EPA attempted to circumvent Congress and achieve overreaching legislative goals through agency guidance. When congressional and public outcry called for a formal rulemaking process, the Obama administration developed a proposal to expand their jurisdiction, ignoring input from states and stakeholders. And over the past year, the Obama administration has contended that the proposed rule defining the waters of the United States would make no substantial changes to traditional jurisdictional waters and has continually assured the agriculture sector that not only will current exemptions stay the same, but the rule only serves to provide more clarity. If clarity, certainty, and better establishing reasonable jurisdictional limits was the intent of the rule, this proposal completely misses the mark. We continually hear testimony that the proposal will allow the EPA the ability to regulate essentially any body of water, such as a farm pond or even a ditch, even if that farm pond or ditch is dry during much of the year. Today we will hear a broad range of concerns from across rural America, including the legal complications that agricultural producers and foresters are certain to face, the cost to states and counties to comply with this unwarranted expansion of jurisdiction, and obstacles to building rural infrastructure. Now, while the committee does not have jurisdiction over the Clean Water Act, this proposal drafted under the authority of that act will have dire and significant consequences for rural America. It is therefore this committee's responsibility to review the proposal and highlight the potential negative consequences if the rule is finalized in its current form. And where the committee does not have jurisdiction, we will continue to engage. One example is the negative consequences this proposal will have regarding registered pesticide applications. As we've heard, an uninformed court decision in 2009 rejected registered pesticide applications in or near waters of the United States to a duplicative permitting requirement under Section 402 of the Clean Water Act. As the administration presses forward with their unprecedented expansion of jurisdictional waters, the implications for farmers, water resource boards, and mosquito control districts will be severe. This committee and this House have made numerous attempts to address this problem and will once again mark up that legislation 2 days from now. Rural America's voice cannot be ignored. As such, the committee would urge the EPA Administrator McCarthy, Assistant Secretary Darcy of the Army Corps of Engineers, and USDA Secretary Vilsack to pay close attention to today's hearings so that they can take note of firsthand the concern their actions have created in the countryside. The committee may call on them in the future to address specific issues and concerns raised in today's hearings. Now, let me be clear. There is a need for more certainty and clarity of the reach of the Clean Water Act. However, this rule will provide neither. After today's hearing, I hope the administration will take action by pulling the proposed rule and start over by working with the states and taking into consideration the concerns that they have heard from the stakeholders. Or if the EPA and Corps proceed, push this rule through, I call on the administration to re-propose the rule for a new round of public comment. This will allow the states and the stakeholders a chance to see the significant changes EPA and the Corps claim they have made since the first comment period closed. I thank the witnesses for taking their time to be here today, which will be spread over 2 panels of testimony. I look forward to the hearing from everyone here today, and I'm pleased to yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Representative Jean Grisham, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as you can see, clearly my legs aren't nearly as long as the chairman, so it took me longer to get to the committee from vote, so I apologize. I'll get a scooter and see if I can't get here more timely. Will you take that? That seems like a great compromise. I appreciate that, and I'm really excited, Mr. Chairman, about having this first hearing in this subcommittee of this Congress. I'm really honored to be the ranking member, and I appreciate your leadership and holding this committee, and I'm very grateful to have the panel here, and particularly I'm going to give a shout out to a fellow New Mexican, Jeff Whitty, who is the Secretary of our Department of Agriculture. He and I have worked in state government since the mid-90s, I think. I think actually I was there before you, so I'm your elder. And I'm really honored that he's here. He's someone who has great respect in New Mexico. I know the other panelists in their own rights are going to give us great testimony, but I want to thank you for your expertise, Jeff. I want to thank you for making the trip, and I appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of our agricultural community and all New Mexicans, so thank you very much. Today's hearing, we're going to discuss the pending rule to define waters of the United States. Now, as a representative from a state that is currently in a historic drought, projected to become now a mega drought over the next several decades, I understand more than ever the importance of protecting this scarce resource. It's essential for farmers, ranchers, municipalities, consumers, fish, and wildlife. Now, policymakers have an obligation to work together to ensure that communities have access to safe drinking water, agricultural producers have adequate water resources, and local economies are not adversely affected by vague and unclear policies and regulations. EPA has stated that the rule is supposed to provide greater clarity on what types of waters are covered under the Clean Water Act, including intermittent and ephemeral rivers. I appreciate the importance of protecting these types of tributaries. 95% of New Mexico's linear streams are actually considered intermittent, and over 280,000 people in New Mexico receive drinking water from public drinking water systems that at least in part rely on these types of streams and rivers. Now, although I, too, agree with the EPA's intent, as stated by the chairman, that they have an obligation, and I have an expectation that they fulfill that obligation to protect clean water, a one-size-fits-all approach can often lead to unintended consequences. Today's hearing will give us the opportunity to identify those unintended consequences and look for areas for improvement and common ground, how we can move forward. I've heard concerns from many stakeholders about how the pending rule could impact their way of living, their ability to regulate and protect clean water, and their efforts to spur economic development. These stakeholders agree that the rule must provide more clarity regarding definitions and jurisdictional issues. I hope our witnesses will be able to provide some specific examples of their concerns and, better yet, constructive suggestions for areas of improvement. In closing, I again want to welcome today's witnesses, including Secretary Whitty, and I also look forward to everyone's testimony. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Now I'm pleased to recognize the full Agriculture Committee Chairman, Chairman Conway, for an opening statement.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I ask unanimous consent to submit my opening statement for the record. But I would like to brag on you and the ranking member. I've got great confidence in you both. This is a terrific topic, timely topic for you to have your very first subcommittee hearing under the 114th Congress, and you're going to be off to a great start. You've got a good panel of witnesses here today, and I want to thank all of you for the trek that you made to come to D.C. to share with us your wisdom about these issues. And so looking forward to GT, your leadership, and Michelle, your assistance on this and other issues that fall under the Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee. And the members on both sides of the aisle are here because you want to be on this subcommittee. And that's a real, it should be heartening to those who are affected by the jurisdiction of the subcommittee. So thank you all for the great work that you're about to do. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. The Chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so that the witnesses may begin their testimony, and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. The Chair would also like to remind members that they will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were present at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of their arrival. Certainly appreciate the members' understanding. Witnesses are reminded to limit their oral presentations to 5 minutes. All written statements will be included in the record. Just call your attention to the light system we have. You'll have 5 minutes when it's green. You have 1 minute remaining, that's yellow. And when we get to the red, we just ask you to finish whatever line of thought that you are currently on. We have 2 panels today full of great witnesses. And I assure you the written testimony has been distributed ahead of time. We really appreciate the effort that went into. I thought your written testimony was well done and very thorough. And we are expecting a vote series later this afternoon. So we're going to try to stay on track with the 5 minutes. So I'd like to welcome our witnesses to the table. As the ranking member has already noted, we're pleased to have the Honorable Jeff M. Whitty, Director, Secretary, New Mexico Department of Agriculture, on behalf of the National Association of Departments of Agriculture from Las Cruces, New Mexico. We have the Honorable Robert Pete Smeltz, Clinton County Commissioner, on behalf of the National Association of Counties from McElhatton, Pennsylvania. We have Mr. Joseph S. Fox, State Forester, Arkansas Forestry Commission, on behalf of the National Association of State Foresters, Little Rock, Arkansas, and the Honorable Martha Clark Mettler, Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Water Quality, Indiana Department of Environmental Management, on behalf of the Association of Clean Water Administrators from Indianapolis, Indiana. With that, Secretary Whitty, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, thank you for those kind opening remarks. And members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to join you this afternoon. It's truly an honor to be here. My name is Jeff Whitty, and I'm here to represent the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. I sit before you today to express my concerns with the significant negative impacts of the proposed Waters of the U.S. rule on farmers, ranchers, and people in other agricultural industries. The stated intent of the proposed rule was to increase clarity and consistency, but in fact it has done the opposite, creating confusion and uncertainty for agricultural producers, rural communities, and state governments. New Mexico is an arid state with diverse landscapes, and overall we get much less precipitation than other states. This means irrigated farms are reliant upon ditches fed by spring runoff, which only flow ephemerally. The proposed definition of ditches has been a point of confusion since the rule's publication. It is unclear if many ditches that feed into the rivers will be considered tributaries under Section S5 or will be excluded as ditches under Section T3 or T4. Ranchers are also dependent on catching rainwater for livestock and to control erosion, which may now be regulated under this rule. In the Southwest, we're especially concerned about jurisdiction over erosional features such as arroyos. It is unclear from the rule if arroyos will be jurisdictional as small tributaries under Section S5 or excluded because of their status as an erosional feature, as gullies are in Section T57. This proposed rule leaves other important terms undefined. One such term, prior converted cropland, causes concern in the agricultural community. Across the nation, agricultural producers and regulators have expressed that they are unclear how the term prior converted cropland will be applied under the Clean Water Act. The rule exempts prior converted cropland from jurisdiction but fails to define the term and fails to adopt any other agency's existing definition. The changes in the Clean Water Act are not just an issue in the arid West. Florida Commissioner Adam Putnam recently testified about the rule before a joint committee. He worried the proposal would assert jurisdiction over isolated wetlands located miles away from navigable waters. Another example is in Iowa, where they have to drain their fields using a tile drainage system. The century-old system will have to be updated in the coming decades. My colleagues in Iowa estimate that the wetland mitigation associated with this upgrade would cost $1.8 billion without the rule, and under the proposed rule, they estimate the expenditures could theoretically balloon to more than $57 billion over a 30 to 50-year period. My team has worked with our state environmental permitting agency, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and others. We have concluded that this rulemaking represents a federal overreach into state affairs, specifically states' authority to manage water. States have been provided with the authority to manage water quality under the Clean Water Act. The New Mexico Environment Department stated in their comments that they are most significantly concerned that the proposed rule's definition of tributary will unconstitutionally increase federal authority over the traditionally held intrastate, intermittent, and ephemeral waters. These concerns, which have not yet been addressed, make managing water quality at the state level burdensome. In addition, the industries that support our nation's food system and public health would be affected by this rule. Pesticide labels, which carry important information about application and use, will change due to the expanded jurisdictional areas where they are prohibited. Pesticides are not used only for crops. They are also used for multiple other ways, such as vector control to mitigate infectious diseases and algae control to reduce harmful toxins in drinking water. Therefore, the expanded jurisdiction of this rule calls for could negatively impact public health by reducing the regulator's ability to use these tools effectively. Conservation efforts could also be affected by the changes resulting from the uncertainty in the rule. For example, in 2005, the BLM began the Restore New Mexico initiative. This program brings together federal, state, local soil and water conservation districts and private partners, including farmers and ranchers, to restore landscapes across the state. These partners have restored more than 3 million acres by thinning overgrown forest, restoring native grasses, removing non-native plants, and reclaiming abandoned oil fields. Over the past 10 years, at least $100 million, 40% from private partners, has been used for on-the-ground conservation programs. We have identified another 4 million acres in the state for restoration work. This rule puts that work in jeopardy. Increases in time and money required for permitting would divert resources away from conservation projects. The average age of the agricultural producer in the U.S. is 58. Unclear regulations and burdens could dampen innovation and prevent younger generations from joining the farm family business. Without the opportunity for these young agriculturalists to succeed, our reliable and superior food supply could be undermined. EPA has stated that we can expect extensive revisions in the final rule. While we hope for extensive revisions, we are concerned that those revisions may not catch all of the issues that have caused individuals, organizations, local and state governments to submit over 1 million comments on this rule. In addition, EPA and the Army Corps have not posted all the comments or responded to them, yet agencies have indicated their intent to finalize the rule in the near future. My request of the committee is that you support and encourage the complete withdrawal of this rule. Late this year in the Cromnibus of 2014, late last year, in the Cromnibus of 2014, Congress...
Mr. Secretary, if you could go ahead and...
I'll wrap it up, sorry.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity to be before the committee today and be happy to answer any questions.
I'll look forward to that exchange, give you a chance to maybe address some of those last points. Commissioner Smells, once again, it's good to have somebody from home here. Welcome, and go ahead and proceed with your 5 minutes of testimony, please.
Yes. It's good to be here, and thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Grisham and members of the subcommittee.
Commissioner, you want to just suspend for a second? We'll see about... Plan B. Go ahead, sir. You can go ahead and start from the beginning.
How's that? Okay, very good. Again, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Thompson, and Ranking Member Grisham for the opportunity to testify today before you, and members of the subcommittee as well, for the opportunity to testify on how the proposed waters of the U.S. rule could impact rural America. My name is Pete Smeltz. I am an elected county commissioner from Clinton County, Pennsylvania, and today I am representing the National Association of Counties. As a county commissioner, I interact with constituents and local businesses every day. Prior to my election as a county commissioner, I spent 35 years with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, managing over 300 road miles and their drainage systems. Clinton County, Pennsylvania is considered rural, with a population of just under 40,000 residents. The vast majority of our county is made up of forests and some farmland. Our state and local governments have a long history of protecting our water resources. Across Pennsylvania, I have heard concerns about how we could be affected by the proposed rule, and these concerns have been echoed by counties of all sizes across the country. NACO has worked closely with technical experts, including county engineers, legal staff, public works directors, and stormwater managers, and ultimately called for the proposed rule to be withdrawn until further analysis and consultation with local officials is completed. This decision was not taken lightly, and we worked very hard to both ensure public safety while protecting water quality. Counties in Pennsylvania and across the country accomplish these goals by working with conservation districts, zoning, passing ordinances, and regulating stormwater runoff and illegal discharges. I'm here today to share with you the 4 main reasons we decided to call for the withdrawal of the proposed rule. First, this issue is so important because counties build, own, and maintain a significant portion of public safety infrastructure, and the proposed rule would have a direct and extensive implications. Local governments own almost 80% of all the public road miles, and so own and maintaining roadside ditches. They are responsible for flood control channels, stormwater systems, and culverts. In Pennsylvania, counties own over 4,000 bridges, which require construction and maintenance projects. Because we own so much infrastructure and are responsible for public safety, defining which waters and conveyances fall under federal jurisdiction has a direct impact on counties. Second, the agencies developing the proposed rule did not sufficiently consult with local governments. Counties are not just stakeholders in this discussion. We are partners in our nation's intergovernmental system. By law, federal agencies are required to consult with their state and local partners before a rule is published and throughout its development. However, this process was not completed by the agencies. This leads to my third point. Due to this inadequate consultation, many terms in the proposed rule are vague and create uncertainty and confusion at the local level. For example, the proposed rules introduces new definitions of tributary, significant nexus, adjacency, riparian areas, and floodplains. Depending on how these terms are interpreted, additional public infrastructure could fall under federal jurisdiction. The proposed rule, as currently written, only adds to the confusion and uncertainty over how this would be implemented consistently across all regions. Our fourth and final reason for calling for the withdrawal is that the current permitting process tied to the waters of the U.S. already presents significant challenges for counties. The proposed rule would only complicate matters. For example, one Florida county applied for 18 maintenance exemptions on the county's network of drainage and ditches and canals. The permitting process became so challenging that the county had to hire a consultant to complete all of the technical material required. 3 months later, as the county moved into its rainy season and after $600,000 had been invested, decisions on 16 of the exemptions were still pending. Ditches began to flood, putting the public at risk, and this is just one of many examples. In conclusion, while many have attempted to paint this as a political issue, in the eyes of county governments, this is a matter of practicality and partnership. We look forward to working with you and the agencies to craft a clear and workable definition of waters of the U.S. that achieves our shared goal, which is to protect water quality without inhibiting the public safety and economic vitality of our communities. And I thank you all again for this opportunity to address you this afternoon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Fox, please proceed with your 5 minutes when you're prepared.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, and members. I'm Joe Fox, and by the way, honored to be here. I'm the State Forester of Arkansas, and I represent the National Association of State Foresters. We are in 50 states and 8 territories in the District of Columbia. State foresters direct programs and protection for America's private forests, 2/3 of the nation's forests, 500 million acres. We're responsible for the silviculture non-point source pollution control measures. We call them BMPs, Forestry Best Management Practices. A recent Virginia Tech study, data collected in 2013 shows that 87% of our forestry BMPs are complied with, 87% compliance with our BMPs nationally. Arkansas's BMPs happen to be voluntary and, like other states, are very effective. In the recent EPA National Assessment Database of all the sources of water impairment, it lists forestry as significantly less than any of the other sources. Healthy forests mean clean air, but they also slow water runoff, allowing sediment to drop out. Healthy forests are clean water things, if you will. The new definition of the WOTUS rule, Waters of the U.S. rule, and terms within the rule is in response to a Supreme Court ruling. We realize that. But I'm concerned that what is meant for clarity is just the opposite. The National Association of State Foresters shared our concerns with our formal comments last November. In those comments, we say that terms like all tributaries of navigable waters mean a broader and generalized reach by the agency. Riparian areas and floodplains can be quite different if they're in New Mexico or Pennsylvania or Arkansas. It's difficult to generally describe water and land features that are regionally different. In South Arkansas, where I'm from, in the flatwoods, the pine and oak flatwoods of Calhoun County, 6 inches means a ridge. And then you go over there in the ridge and you cut those trees, or you paint those trees, or you make that wildlife habitat. That's a ridge in South Arkansas, and it's not in other places. Regional differences require case-by-case solutions, not significant nexus generalities. National rules need the flexibility to do just that, to have a case-by-case analysis. Healthy, productive forests that are beside a road that has a ditch, which now might be classified as a tributary, do not need oversight by EPA because of a generalized rule. In conclusion, state forestry BMPs work, and what works in Arkansas is different than what works in Pennsylvania or what works in New Mexico. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll be happy to answer questions at the proper time.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Commissioner Mettler, please go ahead and proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, and members of the subcommittee, my name is Martha Clark Mettler, and it is my pleasure to appear before you today to provide the Association of Clean Water Administrators' perspective on the proposed rule revising waters of the United States. I'm here today representing the members of ACWA as the association's president. I am currently the Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Water Quality with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. I have been with IDEM since 1995, was named Deputy Assistant Commissioner in 2005, and have been a member of ACWA since that time. ACWA is the national nonpartisan professional organization representing state and interstate water quality control officials responsible for the implementation of surface water protection programs throughout the nation. The proposed rule raises implementation issues and questions that vary from state to state. Due to the varied opinions of the states, ACWA is unable to support or oppose the proposed rule. My statement today does not supersede or alter the perspective or input of any individual state. According to an analysis done by one stakeholder group, 8 states support the rule, 1 state supports the rule with revisions, 4 states are neutral, 10 states oppose, and 22 states believe the rule should be withdrawn. Time spent reviewing the individual state comments will provide the subcommittee with a clear understanding of how the proposed rule will affect state programs. I will highlight some broad categories of concern. Geographic variability. Due to state-to-state differences in geohydrology and water-related legal authorities, as well as uncertainty as to the effects of the rule on the implementation of various sections of the Clean Water Act, ACWA finds it difficult to comment on whether the proposed rule is suitable for all states. For example, some states question the appropriateness of federal jurisdiction over all ephemeral streams, since some rain-dependent streams flow so infrequently their effect on downstream waters is inconsequential. However, some Aqua members support federal jurisdiction over all ephemeral streams, either because they have identified a strong connection to downstream protection or because relying on case-by-case determinations of significant nexus to downstream waters is too resource-intensive. Exclusions. Aqua agrees that specific exclusions listed in the proposed rule provide increased clarity for regulators and the regulated community. Clear exclusions should help streamline permitting by reducing the number of individual jurisdictional determinations that will have to be made. However, some exclusions need clarification. For example, the agencies need to clarify in the final rule that ditches that drain upland but eventually do discharge to waters of the United States are not jurisdictional throughout the upland portion of the ditch. Additional clarity is needed throughout the rule. Aqua agrees with EPA and the Corps that clarity in Clean Water Act jurisdictional determinations is needed. However, to achieve that clarity, Aqua believes the agencies need to provide clear definitions in the final rule. For example, the proposed rule failed to provide clear bounds on the spatial extent of floodplains and riparian areas. Terms like rills, gullies, and uplands are not defined, but should be, to add the needed clarity to the final rule. Aqua also believes that the final rule must make it clear that the ability of states to assume the 404 program is not affected. Significant nexus analysis. The agency should strive to limit the categories of waters that will require a case-by-case significant nexus analysis. For the, hopefully, few waters that do require a significant nexus analysis, the burden should be on EPA and the Corps to make timely determinations. Agreement and consistency between Corps districts and EPA is needed to afford successful implementation of the final rule. Finally, additional guidance is necessary. Aqua feels strongly that the agencies develop a set of regional, ecologically delineated guidance for key elements of the rule, like the significant nexus determinations. However, for this guidance to be useful, states must be involved in its development. Without clear terms and guidance, states will be left to interpret the rule on their own, which will undermine national consistency, increase litigation, and perpetuate uncertainty. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Grisham, and members of the subcommittee, I thank you for this opportunity to share Aqua's perspective on the proposed Waters of the U.S. rule. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner, thank you very much. We'll now proceed with the questioning part. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes of questioning, and I'll exercise the opportunity to ask the first 5 minutes of questioning to this panel. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection submitted comments on October 8, 2014, which, if there's no objection, I'd like to submit for the record. Seeing none, those will be submitted. In these comments, the agency stated, quote, "The rule as drafted creates more confusion than it clarifies and is already subject to differing interpretations by the Environmental Protection Agency and Army Corps of Engineers staff. This confusion will delay permitting that could undermine strong state programs. Pennsylvania asked the EPA and the Army Corps to consider an approach that recognizes regional differences in geography, climate, geology, soils, hydrology, and rainfall, and that supports the strong and comprehensive state programs." So with this in mind, my first question for the panel, this panel, is would you agree that with the assertion that EPA made that this WOTUS rule could actually undermine strong existing state efforts? Go ahead, Mr. Commissioner Smells.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Thompson, for that question, and I'd be happy to try to address that, being that I'm from Pennsylvania and I have worked with DEP on a number of permitting issues in my career. I agree. The question I think you asked was, if you would phrase it again, was the WOTUS decision or determination, rule definition,
would it undermine strong, robust state programs that are currently in place?
And in the state of Pennsylvania, and I have seen this history evolve over time. In the state of Pennsylvania, the state has worked diligently, particularly with soil conservation districts, which do have authority at the local level in Pennsylvania to help process permits for environmental permits of various kinds. They have worked diligently to develop a permitting process that the counties and local jurisdictions currently fully understand. In fact, I would suggest that those regulations within the state of Pennsylvania are actually more stringent than some, or as stringent. I better say as stringent as some of the federal legislation. So if you're already truly regulating a environmental condition, I don't know what additional federal regulation on top of that is going to accomplish. What we're concerned about is then it will lead to more cost, more public safety risk, and more cost because the state has developed what they call a guaranteed turnaround time for permits. And so to answer your question, if we again add additional confusing terminology to the permitting process in a state where you already have a very thorough permitting process, then the counties that the counties that I represent across these, not just Pennsylvania, but across the United States, but in this case Pennsylvania, you're going to add a mixed message. You're going to delay permitting processes. You're going to add engineering fees and engineering costs. You may at sometimes add risk because now a project that you're trying to complete is delayed because there's additional steps that need to be taken over and above that which is already in place. And you're going to get the desired results with the existing state permit procedures that are in place. You're going to protect water, and NACO wants counties to protect water. NACO encourages local jurisdictions and states to have regulatory and permitting procedures in place. So to answer your question, additional confusing terminology will in fact do what you suggest. It will make it more complicated, more costly, and not accomplish the intended results.
Yeah. Secretary Woody, thoughts from New Mexico's perspective, would you see WOTUS as any way undermining the existing efforts that may be in place today?
Chairman Thompson, I really couldn't said it any better than Mr. Smell. The confusing issue of who regulates what has always been a problem in states like New Mexico. And when we've got thousands of miles of streams that are intermittent, ephemeral, and you put a regulation like what's in the proposed WOTUS regulation on top of that for the landowners, the agencies, and even the state environment department, in our case in New Mexico, to know who's going to be in charge of those regulations is going to create a logistical and a costly system. And so I believe it will cause a lot of confusion in our state.
Thank you very much. Please recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take up just where you've left off. And Secretary Whitty, I really appreciate your following up on that question about whether or not one of the unintended consequences would be to see a lessening of states' authority and responsibilities. And I use state in the broadest sense. So local governments and our private partners under the current regulatory framework would be able to manage clean water protections currently. And what you referenced, and I'm going to do it both referring back to your testimony and your comment just now, is that water jurisdiction, water management, water quality, and clean water protections are very complex. And in fact, today we know that we have several communities that in fact don't have safe drinking water issues. So the status quo in the current system, one can argue, is problematic, and that we need to do something moving forward because there are jurisdictional questions and issues in the current context that are not working. Would you agree?
Yes, Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, I would absolutely agree that it's a challenge in today's environment, even without the WOTUS rule.
And I really appreciate that because, and that's not to minimize that you identified significant issues with the current proposed rule, but that getting to a place where all of the stakeholders are clarifying responsibilities and opportunities so that ultimately we protect our water is really important. And one of the other issues that you identified is that arroyos, and we have another thing called acequias in the southwest, primarily New Mexico. One is naturally occurring arroyos, which are often sort of monsoon and our natural geography related. It's dry, then it's really wet, it's dry, really wet. So we have these incredible erosions that water will flow through, and then we make some of those ourselves, and those are acequias so that we can manage water management and irrigation system opportunity. These are not defined by the proposed rule, and it's an example of, it's a small example, but an important example to a rural state like New Mexico, about the inability for EPA in the current context to really understand some of the issues that we have to deal with and the complexities of the jurisdiction. I was struck by several of the panelists talking about the withdrawal of the rule. And I'm wondering, as we look at methods going forward, we could also ask EPA to do a supplemental rule because they have significant comments that, frankly, I think they ought to address, and they ought to re-engage their stakeholders using, in fact, the arroyo as an example, that they're not quite prepared to move forward, and a supplemental rule would give my stakeholders and yours a much quicker opportunity to weigh in from that baseline. What do you think about that?
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, I couldn't agree more. The opportunities that EPA has really to bring people, you had over 1 million people comment on this proposed rule, and while we call for the withdrawal of the rule, we know that WOTUS, the waters of the U.S., has to be addressed in some form and fashion. As a regulator in my state, I know that regulations were created for a purpose, and over time they evolve, either through other decisions or court cases or whatever. And every now and then as an agency, we have to take a step back and look at the real true purpose. Every comment that I reviewed in preparing for this hearing said virtually the same thing. Withdraw, repropose, collaborate with the local groups from the ground up. EPA has an unprecedented opportunity to bring people together and really consider, there are some dynamite, fantastic comments that EPA could use to make a rule that works. It doesn't fit, one size doesn't fit all, as was pointed out on this panel. We in New Mexico are unique, just as the folks in Pennsylvania and Arkansas and all across this nation, and you really have to take that local input. I think it's important, and they have an opportunity to bring it back together and get something that works. They propose a rule that doesn't address a lot of these issues. It's just going to be as confusing as it is today.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate you. I'm really out of time for the rest of the panel. Thank you for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. I thank her, and we now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Desjardins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our panel. We have an awful lot of issues that we face here in Congress, whether it's a health care law, whether it's the threat of ISIS, or the deficit, any number of issues. But I can tell you that this Waters of the U.S. rule has really grabbed the attention of a lot of people, and I know it's not Tennessee-centric because I have contacts from around the country, whether it's California, South Dakota, Colorado, calling me saying you've got to stop this rule. So I'm very grateful that we're having this hearing today. I want to kind of look at it from an oversight perspective a little bit today in terms of how so many agencies are taking steps to circumvent the rule review process, and specifically I'd like to look at it economically in terms of how the OIRA and EPA have tried to circumvent this rule. On March the 3rd, Mr. Howard Shalansky, the administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, or IRA, easy for me to say, right, testified before the House Oversight and Government Reform Subcommittee on Administrative Rules. And this, of course, is the office responsible for reviewing the legality and economic impact of a new federal rule before they are published, and ultimately accepting or rejecting the proposed rule. It was troubling to me that when we asked Mr. Shalansky whether or not he could present to our committee the documents that they used to make a ruling that this was non-major or economically non-significant. We know the cutoff for that is $100 million per year. So what I'm going to ask of you all later, and possibly the second panel, is that we talk about that $100 million per year cost. Somehow, after reviewing the Waters of the U.S. rule, OIRA determined that it was not a significant rule and therefore not subject to congressional review, despite estimates of annual costs ranging from $160 to $278 million per year, and some of these estimates coming from Army Corps engineers and EPA. And what was also concerning was that the lack of documentation that Mr. Shalansky was unable to provide, because it wasn't just the Tennessee Farm Bureau, which is the largest in the nation, who was here asking questions, or farmers from all around our district. The NFIB, or National Federation of Independent Businesses, sent a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, to the EPA, and also Small Business Office of Advocacy sent letters asking for documentation on how they came about this rule, and the EPA sent a letter back saying they have no documentation. So I guess what I'd like to accomplish today is that next time we have Mr. Shalansky or the EPA in front of one of our committees, we can give them documentation that this rule is indeed going to cost more than $100 million. So I don't know if anyone on the panel came prepared with numbers, but Mr. Smeltz, do you have any idea from what you've been hearing from your folks back home what the economic impact might be?
Well, I don't know what broad spectrum of jurisdiction this $100 million figure is you're speaking of. You're talking about across the state?
Across the nation. Across
the nation. Okay. Well, it'd be hard for me to address that from that perspective. I can only tell you, well, I don't have any raw numbers. I do have I can get raw numbers, and we have done this analysis at times. I can tell you that the imposition of any delays, for example, I'll give you an example. There was a project in our area in Pennsylvania where an amendment had to be made, to I think it was $27 million road project. Now this road project there was a change in the environmental design. There was a change in the ditch pattern that they were going to use to build it. There was a bridge and an interchange. I think it was worth $27 million.
Okay. Mr. Smeltz, if you could, just because I've only got about 24 seconds left, does anyone else on the panel have an estimate or an opinion as to whether or not they are hearing that this would have an economic impact of more than $100 million per year? Okay, if anyone can get that, perhaps the second panel, I think that'd be useful information to make sure we get to the EPA and we get to OIRA when they're trying to make a determination on this rule. And thank you for your time. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
Thank the gentleman. Just so everyone's aware, our votes will be pending here, perhaps, any time. Have they started already? I think so. Okay, so we'll continue here with questioning to see how far we can get until we do want to make sure members get to the floor in time to cast their votes. So please recognize from Washington State Ms. Delbain for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to thank all of you for being here with us today. This is an important issue. I've heard about it from farmers throughout my district. And also on the other side, we had over 17,000 Washingtonians who sent in comments in support of the rule. So it's definitely a very relevant issue in in our region. Ms. Miller, I wanted to, in order to make sure that everyone is kind of operating with the same information, I wondered if you could walk us through the differences in Section 402 and 404 permits, kind of the activities they cover, and the special case for pesticides.
Sure. For Section 402, that is generally wastewater discharges either from municipal or industrial dischargers, and most states have a broad definition of waters of the state that they use to implement that program if it's been delegated to their state, which most states have, but not all. And so those kind of permits regulate the discharges into pipe from those facilities and would regulate a number of regulated contaminants that we would want to keep under the water quality standards. Section 401 is a water quality certification that any discharge of fill material would be meeting our water quality standards, and that is a companion document to the Army Corps' 404 permit. So you do have to work in conjunction with the Corps to make sure that you get all your permits, and that was one of the things that was mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. The pesticide general permit was, as mentioned, kind of added as a concern due to a court ruling to maintain permits for applications of pesticides on or near water. And that is a general permit, so most states developed a broad set of requirements that if you satisfy those in your applications of permits, you send in a notice of intent and you're covered by that permit. With that, you're under FIFRA regulations as well to apply according to the label.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You also said in your testimony that, and I think everyone mentioned this, that many parts of the rule need additional clarification, and that's definitely something I've heard from all of our farmers as well. I ran a state agency. I understand rules are not always applied how they were intended, and that they aren't always perfect. Given that, are there adequate clarifications that if they were made to a final rule where you could see the rule as a benefit for the community and from your perspective as a regulator?
Well, I think that if you go back in the history that the agency's first attempted guidance, I won't be able to give you the date, but a few years back, and that was not sufficient for most states that are trying to maintain regulatory certainty because they're trying to follow the federal rule in the implementation of their state rules. So there's different ways, as the ranking member kind of mentioned, of getting to that regulatory certainty in this rule. And I think that states would be open to different ways as long as you ended up in that place where you did have a clear understanding of the meaning. And again, to really get there, you do need to collaborate with the regulated community as well as your state co-regulators, and that's important.
You actually brought up a concern that we've heard from folks about the proposed rule not having engagement with state and local officials. Were any of you involved or contacted, asked for feedback?
Prior to the proposal, no.
No. Thank you. Each region of the country also faces unique issues with water. I think you brought this up in terms of Arkansas. In the Northwest, we have a lot of water, but not always necessarily in the right place at the right time. And a concern I've heard repeatedly is that working farmland is at risk. In addition, many of our farmers have brought up the interface between water quality and quantity, specifically related, and you talked about this earlier, specifically related to new upland areas within the Clean Water Act jurisdiction where water is withdrawn for irrigation or other uses. There's now a potential link to the Clean Water Act, and thus some farmers are worried about a prohibition on withdrawals or against future allocation of waters. This was a general question for everyone. I guess I don't have enough time left to get all your answers, but I wondered if you could comment on this concern from your perspectives, or if you're able to send us feedback on that another time, since I'm running out of time.
Generally, time's expired, but I think that information certainly would be appreciated if we could put that in writing and follow up to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Please recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Dr. Benchek, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also thank the panel for being here. I truly appreciate you coming to Washington to talk to us. I represent northern Michigan, and Michigan has over 20 million acres of forest land, which represents over half the land mass of the state. And of that, over 12 million acres is privately owned, and our foresters and timber managers are working hard to keep the forest properly managed. And I'm concerned about the cost and burden of additional forest federal regulations that would prove detrimental to a struggling industry in my state. Mr. Fox, what are you hearing from foresters in your area about the proposed rule and how it will impact the forest industry in your state?
Well, in general, they're fairly worried about the possibilities of the stretch of our long-standing forest road ditches that are connected to something. Are they going to be jurisdictional with EPA and the Corps of Engineers? There's talk of closing roads. There's talk of closing certain private lands. There's worries over if I'm in the business of producing timber, will I be able to get the timber to the mill? So those worries actually depreciate the value of the trees and the land they're on. So
what effect do you think the proposed rule will have on forest health, Mr. Fox?
Well, the healthy forests are those forests that are thinned, and in Arkansas, thinned underneath as well as thinned from above. And if we can't get skidders and feller bunchers and forwarders on the ground or over the roads, the trucks to the mills, that's a real big problem. So I think the effect is the uncertainty of can we produce from these acres, and that uncertainty again leads to sometimes conversion to other uses rather than forests, which would be the worst thing that can happen for our forests, or sometimes it leads to devaluation of the land and timber.
Let me ask you another question. If the rule goes through as proposed, does the infrastructure currently exist to help both private landowners and other foresters remain in compliance? What issues do you see them facing?
Arkansas is a non-regulatory state, so the infrastructure does not exist to do that. We would have to build our state forestry commission personnel to help landowners or contract with consultants. The infrastructure is not in place in my state to deal with it.
Mr. Smeltz, do you have any opinion on that? Do you have to deal with these issues in your county?
Well, not specific with forests, perhaps, but we are a largely forested county where I'm from in Clinton County. But county governments are responsible for the maintenance of a vast majority of the nation's rural highway system when you leave the non-interstate systems, so that the key to maintaining an infrastructure system is, of course, drainage, proper drainage. And if the abilities to maintain, because of the ambiguity in some of the terminology and additional permits being required, and knowing what to do where the counties to maintain highway systems and road systems, where the rubber meets the road, if there's confusion in that arena, it's going to lead to failures in your infrastructure if you're not able to maintain ditches and maybe be able to clean ditches. So we certainly don't want a rule interpretation that hinders that process at the county level. And so, that's a great concern.
Secretary Whitty, let me ask you a question similar to that. Do you think that this regulation adds more clarity to the plan of managing the waters of the U.S.?
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Benechek, absolutely not. As it's currently stated and proposed, it does not add clarity. It actually adds confusion. My concern would be is the attitude of the agency going to be regulatory enforcement or compliance assistance? And typically it's been in the past regulatory enforcement. And that's the thing you've got to watch out with if you've got unclear rules and regulations.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair would just inform everybody they have called votes, but I think we're going to be able to get through the members that are present for questions, should you choose to stay. And then we will resume 10 minutes after when the last vote is announced. So I'll encourage you to vote right away, and please come on back. So please recognize the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Kirkpatrick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for having this important hearing. This is a big issue for my huge Arizona congressional district. In fact, with all due respect to you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Smeltz, my congressional district's bigger than the entire state of Pennsylvania, and it's covered in forests. So we've recently had some horrific and fatal forest fires. In fact, my neighbors in New Mexico may have experienced some of the smoke from those fires. So Secretary Whitty, my question is for you, and actually I have 3, so in the interest of time, I'm going to ask the 3 questions at one time, and then you can answer them. In your testimony, you said that the proposed rule would make fire prevention, fire management, and rehabilitation more difficult. So my first question is, what specifically in the proposed rule would do that, would make fire prevention more difficult? My second question is, will the proposed rule require any new or different permitting? And then what is your suggestion to changes in the rule that would allow us to continue our forest practices uninterrupted?
Mr. Chairman, Representative or Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, it's my belief that if you look at the rule and the potential, because of the unclear definitions of arroyos and ditches and things like that, gullies, that if we in fact have regulatory creep into areas that weren't historically regulated, you could increase permitting. And if you're going to go in and do, and we in New Mexico and probably in Arizona, it's a lot the same. We wish we had a forest industries. We've got mismanaged, overgrown forests that are causing these catastrophic wildfires. And we've got to get in there. And right now, the Forest Service is hampered because of issues, but they've got to do their environmental assessments, their environmental impact statements, and things like that. If you add this on top of that, there's one more permit and one more step they've got to go through before we can actually manage the forest properly to avoid these catastrophic wildfires. So I think that's the critical point of confusion that we've got to address and clarify in forest management.
In other words, we need to streamline the process for clearing the acreage that can be logged, and rather than increasing that regulation process. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, exactly.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady, and please recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Bost, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm going to ask a fairly simple question real quick, because we are kind of pressed for time to get across the street. But and anybody on the panel, if you can, whether the agency is if they expand these definition, or we just stop them from expanding the definition, do you think your local governments are in the position to make sensible law to take the control that is necessary? I mean, I come from state government, and I know how I feel about that, but I'd like to hear your comments on that.
My comment from Arkansas would be that we have little regulation in this area for forests. We're a very collaborative state. We're working together with groups like the Nature Conservancy, the Arkansas Timber Producers Association, the Arkansas Forestry Association, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and we train loggers and foresters and landowners, forest landowners, how to treat their roads, their stream crossings, their harvesting units, and it's all done on a voluntary basis, and it's working rather well. Our compliance rate in Arkansas is 87% overall, and 90% on those, in my mind, that really mean something, and that's like stream crossings. It's a big deal to us to regulate ourselves, but on a voluntary basis, and that's what I like.
thank you, Congressman, for that question. I would say that a collaborative effort is what is desired by NACO, and that collaborative effort, it varies from, we're hearing it varies from state to state as far as as you're saying in Illinois, the regulatory processes within each state. But for those who, if I may say, the boots on the ground folks at the county level, those who are responsible for maintaining infrastructure, who have to deal with the consequences of this regulatory, they're the ones you really need to consult with. But I would say that I can speak to Pennsylvania that the collaborative effort between the soil conservation districts, the county governments, the state governments have produced the results that I believe this rule is trying to accomplish. There may be areas where it does need to be tightened, perhaps in other parts of the country. But please, we're asked that collaborative approach be used, and please consult with the people who do the work, and they will tell you and they will help you try to get what you're trying to accomplish. And therefore, that's why we ask for the rule to be withdrawn and start all over with a more complete process where all the facts are considered. Thank you.
Chairman Thompson, Mr. Congressman Yost, host, the states have the capacity to deal with at a certain level, but all the states are, as I was visiting with our Environment Department Secretary earlier today about this, his point was that even today states are struggling with their budgets, and if you add one more thing onto the state requirement, they're not sure they can handle it without further, resources from EPA or whoever's requiring it. Because of the budget stress, though, it causes collaboration. And as Mr. Smeltz added, the Environment Department works with our agency, the State Department of Agriculture, Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and others to collaborate and find the best opportunities to work together to address the water quality needs in the state of New Mexico. And that's including EPA at this point in time.
I guess I would simply say that, as mentioned before, the beauty of the Clean Water Act is it delegates certain authorities to the states, and the states are pretty dedicated to protecting their waters and prioritizing based on what they think is important within their own regulatory frameworks. And so to have that flexibility to prioritize based on their own landscape is important.
Thank you all for your answers. I'm from state government, is where I came originally, and I kind of agree with all of you that this is kind of an overreach. So hopefully we can move forward in the right direction. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Please recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and obviously hearing lots about this issue. And it sounds like that EPA has made some determination here that we have a serious problem. And what are they using as evidence that would create all of this discussion? I mean, are we not taking care of our streams and tributaries and like we should be? I mean, what exactly are they up to here? Mr. Fox, I'd like to know your viewpoint on that.
Well, if I'm able to give my opinion, I think they're responding to two things. And one is a Supreme Court decision, the Rapanos decision, and secondly, to budget cuts. EPA's suffered several budget cuts over the last several years. They have less capacity to do site-by-site jurisdictional investigations, and they don't have enough people to do the way they've done business before. And frankly, I see this as a generalized effort to streamline their work so that they can get their work done. I think it takes a year to get a ruling on a jurisdiction.
Mr. Smeltz, would you have an opinion on that?
Yes, I'm not sure what the EPA is trying to do. I would tell you this, sir, that counties across the United States, it's to our advantage for purposes of agriculture, tourism, recreation. We want clean water. You don't need to teach us at the county level that we want to do that because I like Mr. Fox's comment, the collaborative. Would we do it to the degree without any regulation? I don't know, but we know the importance. The other thing is, I would suggest that they're creating them, not to dispute Mr. Fox's comments. It was interesting. They might be creating themselves more work by.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, if they already are short-staffed, they're going to create more work for the counties.
Counties, states, everybody is going to be
everybody, and we're going to have to hire more engineers, and we're going to perhaps hire more attorneys to resolve these issues, and we certainly don't want to do that. No offense to any attorneys in the room. But we don't want to spend our money that way. We want to spend our money in building infrastructure, not in sorting out confusing rules. So perhaps I scratched my head in response to your question.
Exactly. And,
thank you, sir.
Mr. Secretary, any comments in that regard?
Chairman Thompson, Congressman Allen, I have no idea what EPA was thinking. When you're under the kind of budget situation that we meet with our Region 6, and they talk about their tightness of resources all the time. And when you come out with a rule like this, it's going to require more. Sometimes it's better off if they would take a step back and, try to figure out something that makes more common sense and really hit the ground with something that'll work.
Yes, Ms. Miller, would you have a comment as well?
Well, I just was going to mention that the current rule does lead to some regulatory uncertainty.
Yeah.
And if you believe EPA in their description of what they were trying to accomplish was additional clarity.
It covers everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a hole in the ground, pretty
so
much.
some states have struggled with current wording to try and get those jurisdictional determinations. So if you could get clarity, that would be good.
Right. And, what bothers me is that they just don't seem to want to know what you're thinking. I mean, okay, how do we solve whatever problem we have here? And so they create all this uncertainty, and everyone's up in arms about it because you're talking about a lot of money here that could be spent. That folks, things are tight everywhere, and folks are. It's tough. It's tough out there. I mean, the timber business is tough right now, and it's wet everywhere, at least in my district. So it's hard to get the timber out of there. But thank you so much for being here today, and I appreciate your expertise, and we'll do everything we can for you.
Gentleman goes back. Appreciate it. Thank you to the first panel for your expertise and your testimony. Greatly appreciated. As announced before, there is a series of votes have been called and in process. I anticipate this series of votes to last approximately until 3:55, and members will return to the hearing as quickly as possible following the vote. This hearing will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair. There we go. Once again, thank you for everybody for your patience as we were interrupted on the floor. I assure you that was the last vote series on the floor, so we won't have any other interruptions like that at this point. Very pleased to would like to welcome our second panel of witnesses to the table. Ms. Ellen Steen, General Counsel and Secretary of the American Farm Bureau Federation from Washington, D.C. Mr. Jonathan Gledhill. See, you should go with my gut instincts, and I didn't do that. I wavered there. President of the Policy Navigation Group on behalf of the Waters Advocacy Coalition, Annandale, Virginia. Mr. Russ Bagikia, Director of Government, Legislative, and Economic Development, Pennsylvania Rural Electric Association out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Let's see, who do we have here? Mr. Steve... we have everybody. Good. Mr. Sledge Taylor, cotton, corn, soybean, wheat, sorghum, and peanut producer from Como, Mississippi. And Mr. Steve Fogelsong, livestock producer from Astoria, Illinois. Thank you all for your testimony, the written testimony you submitted. I know that all members received a copy of that. I thought it was just very thorough, great information. We're looking forward to your oral testimony. The oral testimony is 5 minutes. The light system is in front of you. Basically, just green, and when it gets to red, we just ask that begin to wrap up, whatever thoughts you're on at that point. And Ms. Steen, would you please go ahead when you're ready?
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Lujan Grisham. My name is Ellen Steen, and I'm the General Counsel and Secretary of the American Farm Bureau Federation. I've spent the better part of my legal career, more than 2 decades, focused on the Clean Water Act and its implementing rules, particularly as they apply to agriculture and forestry activities. I've defended farmers and forest landowners against enforcement actions by EPA and by environmental interest groups who advocate broad interpretations of regulatory obligations and narrow interpretations of agricultural and forestry exemptions. I've closely studied the proposed rule, reading it against the backdrop of my own experience, and I would stake my professional reputation on the fact that this rule, unless it is dramatically altered from what was proposed, will result in Clean Water Act permit requirements and potential liability for an enormous number of commonplace and essential farming, ranching, and forestry practices nationwide. I say potential liability only because we cannot know today which farmers will face agency enforcement or citizen lawsuits. We also cannot know exactly when those inspections and lawsuits will happen. But what is certain is that a tremendous number of common, responsible farming and ranching and forestry practices that occur today without any need for a federal permit will be highly vulnerable to agency enforcement and citizen lawsuits under this rule. Congress never intended to impose Clean Water Act regulation on ordinary farming and ranching activities. Instead, Congress designed incentive-based, state-led programs to promote responsible farming and ranching practices. We support those programs. We support environmental stewardship among farmers and ranchers, and we certainly support clean water. But what we don't support is regulatory changes that would impose costly, complex, and highly punitive federal regulatory programs on hundreds of thousands of farmers and ranchers nationwide. Over the past year, EPA and the Corps have repeatedly told farmers and ranchers that they have nothing to fear from the proposed rule because normal farming is exempt from regulation. These statements are false. The existing agricultural exemptions, as interpreted by the agencies, will not protect farmers and ranchers from burdensome federal permitting requirements and potentially devastating liability under this proposed rule. I've summarized the reasons why in my written testimony, and I'd be pleased to answer questions here today or at any time about the scope of the agricultural exemptions. The EPA officials here in Washington have said that our concerns about the rule are not justified, even silly. But out in the countryside, our experience is that EPA and the Corps interpret their rules broadly, not narrowly. Just as important, citizen plaintiffs have the power to enforce the Clean Water Act, and their lawyers will take the broadest possible interpretation of the rule. At least based on the language in the proposed rule, which is all we've seen, I can say that farmers who dare to farm near or across ditches, small wetlands, or ephemeral drainages will be at great risk if they ever catch the eye of agency inspectors or environmental interest groups. Promulgation of this rule will leave farmers and ranchers with no acceptable alternative. They can either continue farming, but under a cloud of uncertainty and risk. They can take on the complexity, cost, and equal uncertainty of Clean Water Act permitting, or they can try to avoid doing anything near ditches, small wetlands, or stormwater drainage paths on their land. It's a no-win situation for farmers and ranchers. It's not what Congress intended, and it's not necessary for clean water. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thanks so much for your testimony. Mr. Gledhill, please go ahead and proceed for 5 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify on how EPA's rulemaking will affect the USDA's agricultural programs, especially the ones in the jurisdiction of your committee. My testimony today stems from two experiences. First, I represent the Waters Advocacy Coalition, a large coalition, a cross-section of the nation's construction, real estate, mining, manufacturing, energy, and agriculture and forestry sectors. The coalition is deeply concerned with how this proposal could stymie growth and opportunity throughout our economy, and especially in rural America. Second, I had the honor of serving as a career official in the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the Office of Management and Budget. My responsibility in OIRA was to determine how EPA draft regulations and policies affect our national welfare and the budgets and missions of other federal agencies. From these two twin streams of experience, I'm very concerned that EPA is rushing forward with a rulemaking without considering the full ramifications and without fully estimating the benefits and costs of this proposal. USDA's recent budget submission, performance plan, and other program analyses do not evaluate how the WOTUS rule will increase the cost and will reduce the performance of USDA programs. From my own analysis, the impact on USDA programs will be significant and complex. Well, as you've heard today, this afternoon, the cost of the WOTUS rule is multifold. Some of the ones have been mentioned about the permitting. But let me mention some other ones that once you define something as the waters of the United States, many other provisions of the Clean Water Act apply. The spill protection requirements, the water quality standards, the anti-backsliding provisions, and the citizen suit provisions. We just heard about the citizen suit provisions, how they can enforce the Clean Water Act in place of EPA or the states. Anti-backsliding means that once a permit is set, so once a farmer has a cropland, has a discharge that's permitted, they can't make that change and make any change to that crop. Well, farmers are constantly innovating. They're constantly adding new crop protection programs, new crops, new techniques. This would stymie and make changes in land use more difficult. So what are the implications for rural America? Well, as we've heard, farmers and landowners have a choice. They can either cede jurisdiction of their land to federal permitting, or they can spend the money to acquire those federal permits. Those costs are significant. EPA estimates to be $57,000 at a minimum. The WAC has submitted, and other experts have submitted testimony that they would be hundreds of thousands of dollars in certain cases just to obtain and allow the same practices that currently happen today. But that's not all. We heard a lot through the testimony about uncertainty. Well, uncertainty affects one of the other vital elements of rural America and farming, financing. Our financing for farming is a shared risk between farmers, commercial private institutions, and the federal government. If there's uncertainty, that financing dries up. And that makes it very hard for farmers to have certainty they can move forward. So if we look at those costs and that of both uncertainty and of permitting on USDA, how does it ripple through? Well, there are several things. First, there's an effect on crop insurance demand. The recent Farm Bill elevated crop insurance as the main means to share farming risk in this nation. As farmers face higher costs and look at greater risks, their use of farm insurance will change, crop insurance will change. The academic literature says this interaction is complex. USDA, because this is so vital to our farming program and our farming policy, needs to look at the impact of this rulemaking on crop insurance demand and costs. There will certainly be a greater demand for farm operating loans. USDA farm operating loans serve a vital safety net when farmers cannot obtain credit from commercial sources. This program offers a lifeline to many farmers. With an average loan of $57,000 and $1.25 billion obligated, you can see many farmers take advantage of this program. As the WOTUS increases the cost of farming, the opportunities and the risks to these programs will increase. Certainly we'll hear from others about other infrastructure programming that USDA supports in rural America, be it telecommunications, energy. The more project risk increases, the more the risk of default and other costs to USDA. Certainly familiar to this committee is the management of U.S. forests. Forests are land managers and must comply with this rule in the same way the private sector does. The Forest Service will have to redo its NEPA analyses to establish jurisdiction and to decide the impact as part of its manages the multiple uses of national forests. Right now, just since October, there's 14 pending EISs that will probably have to be stopped and reevaluated based on the jurisdictional changes in this rulemaking. And that will ripple through the hundreds of U.S. forests as each land manager tries to make the right decisions in compliance with the rule. Finally, and in conclusion, there's little evidence that USDA has considered these impacts. If you look at the budget documents, the performance plans, the financial analysis OMB does of credit programs that have all been submitted in the last 2 months to Congress, none of the effect of WOTUS is considered in this rulemaking. So what do we do? What can this committee do? Well, USDA has opportunities in the interagency process under OMB to raise its concerns. This committee could ask questions to USDA officials that do they understand the budget impacts? Do they understand the additional demands on USDA programs from this rulemaking? And have they brought those up? Because policy officials can only make decisions when they have information. The White House, Congress, and USDA can't understand if they haven't done the analysis. So this committee can play an important role to have those questions answered. I'm running out of time, but I would say that Ranking Member Lujan, you raised a great question about supplemental versus withdrawal, and the representative from Tennessee raised a question about the economic impact. I would be happy to answer those in questions if time permitting. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. McGeek, whenever you're ready, please go ahead and proceed with 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, members of the subcommittee, my name is Russ Bucica, and I'm the Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for the Pennsylvania Rural Electric Association. PREA is a nonprofit service organization that is headquartered in Harrisburg and represents 14 electric cooperatives in Pennsylvania and New Jersey that supply electricity to 230,000 rural households, representing more than 600,000 consumers. PREA has significant concerns with the rule as proposed by EPA and the Army Corps. As the agencies try to establish greater clarity for the authority and jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act, we are concerned that new and broadly defined regulatory definitions will create more confusion, unnecessary federal jurisdiction, and greater and unnecessary cost. As the matter has risen to an issue of national concern for the 900 cooperatives in 46 states throughout the country, I've talked with a number of our cooperative engineers who are responsible for line construction and maintenance. And in those discussions, in the shared information that we have with one another, we have the same concerns regarding definition clarity, jurisdictional expansion, and the cost-benefit problems that these regulations present to us. So a couple examples from these conversations with these engineers who do our maintenance, our constructions and maintenance. They said that the proposed broadly defined term for tributary and all waters in floodplains and riparian areas are now considered adjacent waters. This broad brush definition would capture many features commonly found on rural land already. Such definition expands federal jurisdiction and would effectively eliminate a general nationwide permit already established by the Corps for utility line activities in and around existing waters of the United States. These permits and the limits that they propose we would not be able to ascertain under these new guidelines. Another concern we have under the proposed rules is that our rights-of-way may be considered waters of the United States, even though they are often simple ditches alongside roads in our rurals, and that's all you ever see, that receive road and water runoff and infrequently hold that water. Though we've been told that the rule exempt ditches that drain only upland and are constructed upland, but the term itself, upland, is not defined within the regulations. Again, confusion and uncertainty, and I can go on, really relate to excess cost and increased cost. I can also talk, but it's in my testimony, about the uncertainty when it comes to granting general permits for vegetation control throughout our cooperative area. Broadly stated, any increase in federal jurisdiction would cause greater hardship and greater cost with these permits. And as you know, Congressman, we, as a distribution entity of electricity, reliability and safety is our major concern. Any increased cost in providing reliable and safe electricity to our members would be a hardship for our consumer members who are our owners. In rural Pennsylvania, we average about 7 consumers a mile. Our cousins, the investor-owned utilities in Pennsylvania, average about 42. So we have 7 people paying for our a mile of distribution line, as opposed to an IOU paying for that same mile with 44 consumers. Any cost inordinately affects us greater than any other utility in Pennsylvania. Cost does matter. In conclusion, the rural electric cooperatives would like to see and recommend that EPA and the Corps withdraw and re-propose the rule to provide clean limitations on the scope of the Clean Water Act. Doing so will allow the agencies to better understand the impacts of small businesses like rural electric cooperatives and hopefully alleviate the costs created by this ever-expanding and overreaching regulations. I'd like to thank the subcommittee for allowing me to testify today. Thank you.
Russ, thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. Taylor, go ahead and proceed whenever you're ready for 5 minutes of testimony.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to offer our views regarding the EPA and the Corps of Engineers' proposed rule to define waters of the United States under the Clean Water Act. My name is Sledge Taylor, and my family and I raise cotton, corn, soybeans, wheat, peanuts, and cattle in Como, Mississippi, and I also serve this year as the chairman of the National Cotton Council. It is our belief that the proposed rule will result in federal permit requirements for many commonplace and essential farming practices. This will result in farmers like myself being forced to endure even more costly regulations and place many of us at risk for fines from the agencies or facing a citizen suit for normal farming practices. In both the proposed rule and the agency's marketing campaign aimed at selling the proposal to farmers, they paint 2 misleading and contradictory pictures. First is the attempt by 2 federal agencies to make only minor tweaks. The second picture is more critical, where the proposed rule purports to protect roughly 60% of the nation's flowing rivers, lakes, wetlands, and drinking water sources, which have been left vulnerable by state inaction and the Supreme Court's confusing opinions. The proposed rule provides none of the clarity and certainty it promises. Instead, it creates confusion and risk by providing the agencies with almost unlimited authority to regulate, at their discretion, any low spot where rainwater collects, including common farm ditches, ephemeral drainages, and agricultural ponds found in and near farms across the nation. The proposed rule defines terms like tributary and adjacent
in ways that make it impossible for a farmer to know whether the specific ditches or low areas at their farm will be deemed waters of the U.S. These definitions are broad enough to give regulators and citizen plaintiffs plenty of room to assert that such areas are subject to Clean Water Act jurisdiction. Given the breadth of the definitions in the proposed rule, the vast majority of ephemeral drainage features and ditches on farmlands would be categorically regulated as jurisdictional tributaries. The vast majority of ponds and puddles would either be categorically regulated as adjacent waters or could still be regulated as other waters. With the exception of very narrow Section 404 exemptions, any discharge of a pollutant such as fertilizer into the ditches will be unlawful without a permit. If low spots in farm fields are defined as jurisdictional waters, a federal permit will be required for farmers to protect their crops. The same goes for the application of fertilizer. As a result, the proposed rule will impose on farmers the burden of obtaining a Section 402 permit. I farm in the Delta and in the hill regions of Mississippi. Our area has soils that have very little internal drainage, so water must drain across the land to adjacent ditches and streams. As a standard agricultural practice, we use an implement called a water furrow plow to better define a small drain through these depressions deemed working lands by the USDA. This allows water from storm events to drain more quickly. Since these areas are normally dry, except during extreme storm events, we plant through these areas and the approximate 6-inch deep depressions we create with the water furrow plow. In addition, we apply crop protection products and fertilizer when needed on the plants that grow in these areas. The proposed rule, by its terms, extend permit requirements to water furrows. If these small drains become regulated, producers will not be able to apply needed inputs to raise a crop within 100 feet or more of these drains. I have served on my county's NRCS committee for 25 years and appreciate the importance of USDA's voluntary conservation programs. On my farm, we have utilized the EQIP and CSP programs. Many farmers have worked with the NRCS to implement land leveling practices on their operations. Water quality data clearly show these land leveling practices significantly reduce non-point source pollutants. Under this proposed rule, these practices will require permits, which will require mitigation, which will make these voluntary conservation measures too costly to implement, even with financial assistance. Everyday farming activities in or near ephemeral drainages, ditches, or low spots could be a violation of the Clean Water Act unless a costly permit is obtained. The tens of thousands of dollars of additional costs for federal permitting of ordinary farming activities is beyond the means of most farmers and ranchers, the vast majority of whom are family-owned small businesses. The agencies have made promises to make significant changes to the rule, and this is a positive step. Given the amount of public interest in this rule, we strongly encourage the agencies to release the revised rule again for public comment. The Clean Water Act involves an extremely complex set of rules and regulations, and it is important for rural America to have ample input into any final rule. It is clear that this rule will have significant impact on rural America and production agriculture. I thank this committee for its diligence in defending agriculture and appreciate the opportunity to testify on this important issue, and I would be pleased to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Your testimony is appreciated. Mr. Fogelsong, whenever you're ready, go ahead and proceed with your testimony for 5 minutes.
I don't have near the speaking voice of Mr. Taylor, so I want to be heard here. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Fogelsong. I'm a cattle and hog farmer from west central Illinois, and we raise corn and soybeans up there, and we've got a ranch down in southwest Georgia as well. And I'm a member of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. This afternoon, I'll be speaking on behalf of livestock producers, dairy guys, and poultry producers across the United States. It's a great opportunity. We certainly thank you for giving us a chance to do that. Animal agriculture producers pride themselves on being good stewards of this country's resources. You know, we maintain lots of open spaces, rangelands, provide wildlife habitat, and all the while we're doing this, we're working on sustainably producing food for the world. But in order to provide these important functions, we need to be able to operate without excessive federal burdens. This one we're talking about here today is excessive. As a livestock producer, I can tell you that after reading the proposed rule, it's got the potential to impact everything that I do on my place. And every tributary stream, dry pond, you name it, and we've got lots of them, are going to be an issue. And what's worse, the ambiguity that's proposed in this rule, and these folks and everybody today has done a great job of explaining just the problems that we've got there. What I want to do is spend a few minutes, plus you guys are being bored, and if the clerk could fix that, we're going to put up some pictures here. We're going to do a little pictorial here of my place. This picture here that you're seeing, this is my house. You can see my house tucked away there. And tonight, when you go on Google and you dial down a little bit closer down there, you're going to see my wife and one of my grandkids. And they're swimming right there next to that dock there that goes out. There's a little blue dot, little white dot. I did this. This picture was taken in 2012. The worst drought in my entire life. By far a bad deal for us, but it's going to be a great day today because all the vegetation's gone off of our ranch, and we're going to be able to see every depression that's out there pretty clearly. There's a little blue and white dot. When you see those, you're going to wonder what that's all about. Well, we're real sensitive around our place to skin cancer, and we wear protective clothing. That's why I could pick them out, and I knew where they were at. So that's kind of where we live. This is all old coal strip mines is what this is. Everything out here has been reclaimed. Man turned it all upside down, and we spent all of my lifetime putting it back together and turning it into a ranch where we can produce cattle. When we go to this next deal, this 2012, this looks like a moonscape. This is a pasture just north of the house up there. You can see we've been feeding the cows. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning here. You can see that little line of ants over there that look like they're going back and forth to burrow. That's cows, but we're a long ways up. The question here that this picture brings up, you see that dry lake right there, that dry lake bed. There's no water left in it. All of those little rills that run down to that, are those a WOTUS? Is that a waters of the United States? That's the question I've got to answer. Here's another little picture. Same kind of deal, little pond out there. Now, Mr. Lucas, in your country, this is called a tank. And farmers and ranchers go out and they build tanks, and they build them so that the cattle have got water. And in the summertime, those cattle will go out and hang out in that tank. And it's really nice on a morning that it's warm enough that you can go swimming at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's pretty doggone hot. Now, the question I ask you here, is this waters of the United States? Here's a picture of our confinement barn, just the end of it right there. We run about 4,500 head of cattle in there. That's a roof structure with slats underneath of it. All of the waste in those cattle produce goes in that tank, and we use every last bit of it to improve the soil conditions and the fertility on this ranch. We do a darn good job of maintaining that. There's no runoff coming out of that building. And here's a little lake that's only about a quarter of a mile away from that building right there. And all that land that runs around there drains into it. Our concern is, do we have to do something about it? Is this waters of the United States? Here's the other end of the barn. It is a quarter of a mile long. You can see it from a jetliner if you leave Peoria and fly to Dallas. So it's a pretty good sized shed. Same deal. We got to have a few pens around there where we gather up cattle. When they come in, they've got to hang out someplace. And this is where they wind up. But everything drains someplace. Now, this is another question here. Those buildings there happen to be hog buildings. They could just as easily be chicken barns. But those hog buildings there, and you'll notice, and here's the question on this one here. See that parking lot? There's about 25 employees that park their cars right there. And all the dust that comes out of the fans on those buildings lands here. Lois Alt in West Virginia fought a great battle with the EPA a year or so ago over this very question, because when it rains, that water flows somewhere. You all understand how that goes, and it all goes downhill. Well, it goes east here, and it runs through those rills and winds up in that lake. That lake is where we water those hogs. Does the EPA have jurisdiction over that lake? And this is the last picture I want to show you right here. If you look down there to the far right-hand corner on there, that little circle, that's the Illinois River. Now, boats float there. We ship corn up and down that river on barges. That is navigable. That is a water of the United States, and it always has been. Nobody owns that. That is a water that we're considered. At the opposite end of that deal right there, you're going to see that little circle. That's the middle of my ranch. And you see those little lakes that I've been showing you, those little blue lines that are on there. And that's Otter Creek, all the little fingers that go around there that flow all the way up and they go down into that deal. Now, here's the deal. I pay for that. I don't see the EPA or the Corps on any mortgage that I've got that says they've got jurisdiction over that. And I sure as heck don't see them come payday. So it causes me quite a bit of concern when they want to have control over that, and it flows all the way to the Illinois River, 11.5 miles away. Where does that thing end? Where does their jurisdiction start and stop? That's the question that we've got to ask. And I certainly thank you for the opportunity, and will entertain any questions you might have.
Okay. Well, I thank all the witnesses for your testimony. We're going to proceed with questionings, and I'm going to yield my time to the Chairman Emeritus of the Full Agriculture Committee, Mr. Lucas.
Well, I'm always proud to know, Mr. Chairman, when there's acknowledgement I'm still alive. There's something to be said for that. And a wonderful ranking member, too, and our friends on the panel there who went through all the joys of the Farm Bill process with us and tried to make sure that the resources for crop insurance and EQIP and all those things were there. Now, quite clearly, as you all make the case, along comes issues that essentially are beyond our control. Depending on what the EPA determines on waters of the U.S. and a myriad of other rulings, it literally could turn us inside out. So thank you for being here today to create a permanent record for the subcommittee to use and the full committee to use as we work with the folks who care about sound science to try and make sure that we can continue to farm and ranch and do the things we love, which is feed not only the people of this country, but for that matter, the entire world. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the chance to have a word, and I don't know that I have a particular question for our witnesses other than they presented very factual, high-quality information for the record, and that's a part of it. You help us make the case. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, gentlemen, and please recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes worth of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to recognize the panel and appreciate your efforts today and agree that we've heard a great deal of testimony and had the opportunity to review your written testimony that shows that there is a great deal of uncertainty. And the point that we were able to clarify, one point in the earlier panel, is the status quo. We have significant issues in terms of clarity about who does what, and in the proposed rule by EPA, we find ourselves in much the same situation. And I'm reminded, quickly before I go to 2 questions to the panel, Mr. Chairman, recently I was in Florida and I had the chance to visit a Native American tribe, the Miccosukee tribe. And they used to farm in the Everglades and are no longer able to do that or enjoy and not just enjoy, for their livelihood and diet, they can't hunt or fish on their reservation anymore because of the phosphorus and other pollutants, largely due to agricultural practices. And we don't want to stop those agricultural practices, so we have to figure out what it is that we're going to do. And so I really appreciate that we look at this issue carefully and agree that we've got a long way to go. Ms. Steen, in your testimony and your efforts, and I'm going to quote you, to ditch the rule or start all over, I want to say that according to the EPA, that the agency has received letters and comments from over 100 organizations, including the American Farm Bureau Federation, requesting clarification of the WOTUS rulemaking. And part of it is because the status quo is generating too much uncertainty, so sort of on the other side. Does the Farm Bureau still believe that the current situation, without regard to the new proposed rule, is not adequate to deal with clean water?
Yes, ma'am. We do believe that there is a need for a rule. We do not find the current situation to be acceptable. However, we think that this rule, this proposed rule, would be dramatically worse than the current situation, and we need a different rule, not this rule.
I appreciate that, and I would love it as a follow-up. I want to make sure I have enough time for my second question to restate for the committee and for the chairman and myself, if you can, what you are proposing as best practice so that we are, in fact, doing more for clean water and management and the complexities of these issues. That would be helpful to the committee. Even though we don't have jurisdiction over EPA, we want to do best practices and engage with USDA. So that would be great, because basically we agree, and I think you heard that resoundingly in the committee, that the stakeholder involvement on this proposed rule is inadequate. And with that, I'm going to use the balance of my time. And I appreciate Mr. Gledhill. Thank you very much for your comments. And I actually want to get right at some of the permitting issues. And I really want to get a handle on how we come up with the cost of permitting, because that I agree that uncertainty is problematic and the economic consequences is significant, but we really do need to know what is real and what's not real. Can you cite an EPA number of that $57,000 for cost of a permit? I can't find that or the tangible evidence that that's the cost.
Yes, that number is in EPA's economic analysis.
All right, because I'm having trouble with that. Is it for a 402 permit, or is it for a general or individual permit?
It would be for an individual permit.
Okay. And then, can you give me what all goes into the cost of the $57,000 and associated cost?
Well, we don't have EPA's detailed information to know exactly what goes into it, but the typical parts of a permit would be to show that what your discharge is, your monitoring requirements. You have to propose it. There's an administrative cost to file it. So there's several different components, including consulting and as well as monitoring, that would go into that cost.
Yeah, I'd like to submit for the chairman and, again, a request for you. I appreciate your being here. I think it's important, both from the EPA and from our expert witnesses, we really need to understand the genesis of that cost, given particularly that this panel has identified that cost to individuals and private landholders could be considerable. We ought to know exactly what that is, how that was identified and arranged, and have that as part of our record, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs, is not a member of the subcommittee, but has joined us today. Pursuant to Committee Rule 11E, I have consulted with the ranking member, and we're pleased to welcome him to join in the questioning of the witnesses. Please recognize Mr. Gibbs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the panel, and thank you for our livestock farmers and our cotton farmers and all that you do for to feed the American people and clothe the American people. A couple things I want to start with. First of all, Mr. Fulgerson, if I said your name right.
You did pretty good. That's good.
You asked quite a few questions, and I think I can answer some of those questions for you. This will be a little bit reverse. First of all, the EPA did a study more than a year to figure out that water flows downhill. So taxpayer dollars I'm sure were used wisely. We had hearings in my committee. I chair the committee that does have jurisdiction in this issue. And we had a joint committee with the Senate a few weeks ago. And what we heard from Administrator McCarthy and Secretary Darcy of the Army Corps, that they're going to look at all this by a case-by-case basis, be very subjective, because they just, that's how they got to do that. So they're going to really open up the door for a lot of bureaucrats to come out to your farm and tell you that's waters of the United States. And to answer the ranking member's question, I have a picture here. This is Mr. Chairman, this is a farm in Tennessee. It's a no-till field. You see the corn residue, you see the wheat. I don't know how well you can see this, but there's it kind of looks like a washout to me a little bit. Probably should be maybe a grass waterway there a little bit. Well, apparently, it happened that the Army Corps in the Nashville district declared that waters of the United States. Now, I held this picture up in front of Ms. McCarthy and Darcy, and they said, well, that's why they need to rule, because that wouldn't have happened. I would argue that the Nashville district of the Army Corps has already implemented the rule. And in this case, from the ranking member was asking about cost to get their 404 permits, $318,000. Time they did the studies and the consultants in this case, in this instance. And then what also happens on the land around it, joining property owners, because of the interconnectivity rule, they are automatically declared waters of the United States. And the panelists, you're absolutely right. That field now would have to get a 402 permit from the EPA to apply herbicides. So this the cost and is just really, really outrageous. And you mentioned Mr. Gladhill about stifling innovation and unknown and the citizen lawsuits. And I would argue, Mr. Chairman, that this rule, and it's probably going to get implemented because the EPA is moving fast and furious in the next 30 to 60 days. And I asked the question to Administrator McCarthy. In our hearing, a lot of questions came up, and they said they would address that in the final rule. And I said, well, you're going to issue a supplemental so we members of Congress and American people can see it? And they said, no, that's not necessary. We're moving forward. And I would argue that this takes us backwards, because a one-size-fits-all policy out of Washington, D.C., when it comes to water and land, is best regulated at the state and local level and not a one-size-fits-all policy. Because when you think about bodies of water and lakes and streams around the country, there's a lot of different things happening. The flow, the critters in those bodies of water, the sunshine, the pH, and have just this power grab. And by the way, on the ranking member talked about comments. 34 states out of the 50 states are opposed to the rule and asked for, and 22 of those states urged that it be withdrawn completely. 34 states. I believe it takes 36 states to ratify an amendment of the Constitution, so you can see the point. And we all know that there's a whole bunch of organizations, both state and local, and private sector entities in the Farm Bureau that are opposed to the rule. So, we need to stop this. And I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. We've got to get support in Congress because they're moving ahead. And I want to thank you for coming today to share real stories of what you've your challenges you have every day, and your pictures were excellent. I'm a farmer myself, so I can share some of those thoughts with you. But for them to put this rule out, circumvent Congress, is really outrageous, and I think it makes us go backwards to protect the environment. Because if you remember how the Clean Water Act in '72, when it was passed to be a federal cooperativism where the states would implement and enforce the Clean Water Act, and the feds would have guidance, and that's why every 3 years the states have to submit a plan of action to the U.S. EPA. And so this is nothing but a power grab. It takes power away from the states. It erodes personal property rights, and it's going to add to costs both the state and local governments and the farmers and developers and so on. So I guess I don't really have a question. I was answering some of your questions, but we need to stay on this, and I want to thank you for coming and try to bring more light to this issue. Because and another point I think that needs to be made, Mr. Chairman. As a farmer, and the farmers are here today, they drink that water first, and they live in that land. And farmers are excellent stewards of the land, and we all want it to make the water as clean as possible, and for the next generations to come. And so, just again, thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I take the liberty of taking my round of questions at this point. Let's start with Ms. Steen. Historically, we've looked to the word navigable in the Clean Water Act and a Commerce Clause connection in answering the question of what is under federal jurisdiction as navigable, and how does this proposal fit with those concepts?
Well, it goes completely beyond and would have nothing to do with the Commerce Clause or commercial use of waters, and in fact what it really codifies, in our view, is something even beyond the substantial, or the any hydrologic connection test that the Supreme Court rejected in the Rapanos decision. At that point in time, EPA had already been told that the migratory bird rule, which was purportedly based on the Commerce Clause authority, was unlawful. They went back, they developed a theory for saying that waters, or so-called waters, with any hydrologic connection to navigable waters would be jurisdictional. The Supreme Court rejected that in Rapanos, and this rule now would codify a view that anything with any not insignificant, not speculative connection, no matter how remote, no matter if it's a hydrologic connection or a biological connection of animals moving back and forth within a region. And we all know that resources are connected. We all know that waters are, there's a hydrologic cycle. Animals move around. I mean, the breadth of the connection that EPA is saying here in the core can justify sweeping areas that don't even look like water, into the term navigable waters is astounding. And if I could, on that point, just cite to one particularly striking piece of the preamble, the term water isn't defined in the rule. And it's because a lot of the things being regulated as waters under this rule don't look like water. They're land. But they say in a footnote that the agencies use the term water and waters in categorical reference to streams, rivers, ditches, wetlands, ponds, lakes, blah, blah, and other types of natural or man-made aquatic systems. And then they say, well, puddles won't be regulated. Well, how big does it have to be a pond? We already know ephemeral waters that exist only when it rains, can be regulated because that's what they call an ephemeral stream. So I think there's literally no limit to what could be viewed as a jurisdictional water under this rule.
In your opinion, would you agree that, given the realities, the definition of the Clean Water Act, which was fairly well articulated back in 1972, 1973, that what both the EPA and the Corps of Engineers are trying to do is really to exercise legislative functions. They're trying to, through rulemaking, trying to circumvent the legislative branch and create new law.
I think, regardless of intent, I think that's the effect of what they're proposing. Absolutely.
What's most important
absolutely.
is
the effect of what they are proposing here would be to dramatically expand beyond worlds beyond what Congress ever had in mind in 1972 when it used the term navigable water, and beyond what the Supreme Court has said is within their authority. They've tried to shoehorn, or they have shoehorned, this rule into the term significant nexus that was used by Justice Kennedy, but they've made it limitless. They've made it absolutely limitless.
Yeah, that's our concerns.
Yes, sir.
Here. Mr. Gladhill, it seems that the federal government has conflicting missions. The Agriculture Department promotes food production, yet the EPA and the Corps are doing everything they can to stifle such production through increased regulation. If the EPA and the Corps succeed with all these regulations, in your opinion, what will be the impact on the rural economy and, quite frankly, our nation's food supply for all Americans?
Well, thank you, Chairman. One way I look at trying to do the economic impact, if I look at Mr. Taylor and Mr. Fogelson, there's 70 million farms in the United States, small, medium-sized farms. If each one of them spends $1.50 to try to understand this rulemaking, we're already at $100 million of effect, which triggers, under the statute and executive orders, rigorous review, the highest level of rigorous review by the executive branch. And we do have conflicting missions in the federal agencies between USDA, FDA, EPA, all these agencies, and OMB and the White House and the Executive Office of the President is where these issues are supposed to be resolved, where people estimate the impact so policy officials and elected officials can understand and make the trade-offs. Because it's not between environmental protection or rural development, it's having the right balance of both that allows us to achieve both. And we can only do that if we have the information, and if we make these decisions in a public, transparent way in which many stakeholders are collaborating. And we're concerned from the impact on USDA programs that collaboration is not happening even within the administration, much less, as you've heard from all the stakeholders here on these two panels, with the broader stakeholders in our economy, especially our rural economy. So I don't think we know the impact, and my concern is the agencies are not doing their role to understand the budget and mission impact and conveying that to elected officials in the administration and, more importantly, to the public as a whole.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Bagica, our rural electric co-ops are just well known for affordable and reliable electricity. Could you elaborate on the specific challenges facing utilities such as rural electric co-ops with an expansion of the WOTUS rule and where there's obviously an obligation to keep the lights on?
That's correct, Congressman. The challenges that we will face.
Russ, you want to check your microphone there?
The challenges that we will face if this proposed rule goes through are ones of enormous cost. As I've mentioned in my testimony, with the broad definitions of tributaries and adjacent waters, that is what our environment is. We have power lines that have to be extended. We have transmission lines that have to be extended. In Pennsylvania, we're basically talking about distribution lines. But with our 900 cooperatives across the country in 46 states, we're talking about transmission lines, bringing some of that clean energy back to back to our members, and we're going to need the ability for quick and honest permitting that is affordable for us to transmit that power. We have a study that says if we go beyond what is that general permit that I've alluded to in my testimony, that the cost of individual permitting, and it's documented in the written testimony, is 10 times higher than a general permit. So the cost that we're experiencing right now will more than 5 times the amount. We can't afford to do that, especially the people that we represent. We have a higher poverty rate than most areas of the country, serviced by investor-owned utilities. And as I said before, the striking difference between us and other power companies that are owned by stockholders is that we have a population density of about 7 members per mile. They, on average, nationally, it's 42 members per mile. We can't afford any cost input, especially now, as we've gotten through this economic climate, as we all know in rural Pennsylvania and in rural United States, rural areas that are first one in when hit with the economic downturn, and we're the last ones out. So any additional cost to maintain and to strengthen and to expand our rural infrastructure with this rule being in effect would only cost us more money.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Taylor and Mr. Fogelsong, on a related issue, part of the testimony I've heard about is, in terms of how, if this would go into effect, those who would have responsibility to be the regulators, the police, so to speak, with the lack of clarity in this rule, I guess I have a concern of that we would see a wide variance of interpretation depending on what region where you lived. In Pennsylvania, I ran into this with, we're blessed, God has blessed us with great natural gas. And it's really been good for my congressional district. It's been good for the Commonwealth. And yet I can tell you, because of the size of the state, we're in a number of different Corps of Engineer districts. And depending on what office you're in, supposedly these regulations are the same, but there is wide variance in terms of how they are interpreted. And so my question for both of you, as the EPA and the Corps continue to claim that normal farming practices are and will continue to be exempt, yet there has been considerable concern about how this will be interpreted. Can you, each of you, expand on your concerns regarding this? I'll start with Mr. Taylor.
Well, of course, that's one of my main concerns, and it's not just the regulators that may come in and you may check with one and they may give you one opinion and one would give you another, but also, just citizens bringing suit would concern me greatly because, the law is so broad that it may not define, it doesn't necessarily define what those waters are, but it's broad enough that it could be taken to court and I might even win. But in the meantime, it's cost me, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars to defend myself, and that's a real concern. I'm not sure that it.
Unfortunately, I'm afraid just about every farmer is going to wind up with some practical experience, and I'm no different than that. We've experienced that at home, where the Illinois Department or the Illinois EPA is the cop on this deal. And I've got land in at least 2 different districts with 2 different guys that interpret the rules dramatically differently. The one guy, if there's an issue that we need to deal with, comes out, we sort it out, we get it fixed, and we go on. The other guy, you wind up sitting with the Attorney General of the state of Illinois, just like that. And you spend a boatload of money trying to fix and defend your deal. And then it becomes a matter of principle. And you know what principles are. Principles means you got to see how deep your pockets are. But unfortunately, in my situation, I've got children and I've got grandchildren that I've got to set an example for. And I'll be doggone if we're going to lose this fight. So we're spending money hand over fist. And I think this just makes it that much worse. I've had the opportunity to sit with the U.S. EPA on a couple of occasions where we were talking about the definitions The last time I was here in D.C., we sat down with EPA. I had 3 attorneys with me. They had 7 or 8 with them. And we didn't get a damn thing done all day because we argued. And you ask about solutions on what this is. I've got a solution for you. You get Sledge and me and a whole bunch of these other shareholders. We get together with some folks over at the EPA. We ban all attorneys from being in the room because all they want to do is fight. And we can come out of there with a set of recommendations that are actually workable. But until we get to that point, I'm not sure that there's a solution or an end game in this. And it is so hard for us to know where we want to be tomorrow. And what we should do and what those rules are going to impact us. At our place and most farms around the country, I'm out doing stuff. I'm not a detail guy. I want to go build something. My wife's the bookkeeper. And that's the way you find out. And she's got buckets that she puts money into. And when we've put $100,000 to defend our right to farm in a bucket for the EPA, that means I don't have $100,000 to go out on this place and build another pond or put in some dry dams or something else. And that the bottom line, no water ends up getting any cleaner because of extra regulations. If you really want to fix the thing, give me a carrot, not a stick, because all the stick does wants me to go sharpen my sword. And when you get to be 60 years old, you know how that is. We're all pretty crusty and pretty tough to deal with. So that's the issue. But I appreciate the question, the opportunity to answer it.
Thank you. I'm going to take this opportunity to yield any additional time to my colleagues. Mr. Gibbs?
I just want to follow up on the ag exemptions. For Ms. Steen, they had the interpretive rule. Of course, we got that out in the coronavirus, but USDA worked with the EPA, said they had to do the interpretive rule to make it clear for agriculture. But is it correct to say that the interpretive rule was only in effect for farmers out here if they were partnering with NRCS on a program? Is that true?
Yes, it required compliance with NRCS standards in order to qualify for the exemption for the normal farming exemption for those conservation practices. Yes.
So I guess you could extrapolate from that they need the interpretive rule, they thought, because they weren't so sure what the bureaucrats were going to do when the WOTUS rule is in place, and they were trying to get USDA was trying to look out, but I think your concerns are really legitimate, and I guess you concur that without the interpretive rule, which I think it was kind of a facade, trying to demonstrate that USDA is trying to help, but it really didn't have the impact because you'd have to have NRCS sign off, and so if a farmer wanted to go out and build a fence on his own and not do cost sharing or do anything with the NRCS, he'd have to he possibly could be forced to get a 404 permit for dredge and fill, correct?
Yes, sir. We were always pretty much mystified by what the interpretive rule was meant to do because it really seemed like a distraction from the real issue about the expansion of waters of the U.S., and in our view, it gave farmers nothing of any real value because it made the NRCS standards regulatory, in effect, by saying you're only exempt for these practices if you comply with NRCS standards. So you make NRCS in the position of a regulatory authority, essentially, and at the same time cast a cloud of doubt over the other farming practices that aren't listed on that interpretive statement, which should be exempt in any event, at least.
I think that's an important point to remember. Soil Conservation Service, NRCS, are out there working with the farmers. It's the carrot approach, as Mr. Fogelsong said, and other than hammer. And I know in the President's budget for the EPA, he actually cut compliance expenses and increased enforcement expenses. So we're going the wrong way there on that. And the other point, if I just conclude, I want to make is I think there's maybe a misnomer out there that if the water is not being regulated by the U.S. EPA, it's not being regulated under the traditional navigable waters. The waters that aren't traditional navigable, they are being regulated. Me as a farmer, our farmers out here, they can't just go out and haphazardly do things. I mean, they'd be in trouble. And so the states are doing that regulation. That water that's non-navigable, traditional non-navigable waters, as we would see them, are being regulated, and so that's a misconception out there. I want to make that point. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing to bring more light to impact agriculture. It's very important.
Gentleman's welcome. I'm now pleased to yield to the ranking member for any additional questions or closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just going to make my closing statement, but I'm going to include something that one of the panel experts identified. Mr. Vogelsong, I think there is a very important balance, and starting with the carrot and creating collaboration and getting folks who are willing to come to the table and have good ideas is really the purpose of this hearing today. We know that there are considerable comments. We don't believe, I think you heard that from both sides, that's one of the benefits of the Ag Committee is that there's a real reasonable sense about how we move forward by all of my colleagues on both the subcommittee and the full committee. And we need the EPA and we need others in any administration to be clear who their stakeholders are. And where we have real problems and we have to do real compliance and a carrot's not working, then we have to have the tools and resources to do that right job. But you start with creating an environment where we can do something about clean water. So I really appreciate that from everyone here. I appreciate very much the chairman for raising the issue and inviting so many different stakeholders to come here today and share your concerns, reiterate those, and help us identify maybe some possible solutions forward with both EPA and USDA. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, and thank you, Ranking Member. I just want to thank the witnesses panel, this panel witnesses, and once again the first panel witnesses. I thought the testimony was just outstanding, both oral and your written testimony. I think that it will all be a part of the record that we're going to be able to use as we continue to look at this situation. Granted, the Clean Water Act is not under the jurisdiction of the Agriculture Committee and this subcommittee, but quite frankly, the implications on rural America and the implications on agriculture, that's clearly within our wheelhouse. That is what we were responsible for. I thought there were great information, great issues raised. Quite frankly, the Clean Water Act was a very good piece of legislation that was written. It was written in a very thoughtful way, and but it had limitations that were defined that way purposely when it was enacted. It was written with a section that includes strong federalism reference, where it recognized the primacy of the states in terms of the regulation of water. Clearly, navigable waters were meant to be very prescriptive, and what the EPA and the Corps of Engineers has done really has stepped over the line. And so I'm very pleased that we're having this hearing, and this, as well as the hearings in other committees such as Transportation Infrastructure, a subcommittee that my good friend in Ohio chairs on that committee. Once again, thank you to everybody. I thought this was very thoughtful, very helpful, and under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This Committee on Conservation and Forestry hearing is now adjourned.
Yes. Good luck to you. When are you going back? Wednesday.
Got a few other stops on with.
I just want to introduce myself, Neil Moore, American Farm Bureau. I understand that you know Jim Newsom. I do. You got stories on him that you could share that.
Well, I could, but I'm afraid to tell a few on me.
I had the privilege of working with Jim at the National Academy in the late 90s. You got the Good job, Chairman.
This is Kevin Association, 1981, I think it was, and that was a deal with Jim. He and I both started at the same time. We kind of broke each other in that. And I did a lot of work with the National Academy Association early mid-90s. Well, I really enjoy working with the cattle because that's my first love. I love the cattle. I just